Okay, this is lesson 42 in our EMT course. This is about responding to calls. A couple hours long online, and we integrate all this stuff into lab sessions. We're going to talk about how to receive a dispatch, how to find your route, the driving to the call, and then radio comm and crew comm on the way. So your dispatch will, in almost every system, include an address where you're supposed to go and cross streets, and then the nature of the call, and that varies from system to system in terms of how detailed they get, but chest pain or seizure or motor vehicle crash or something. And then in many systems that use the MPDS, the Medical Priority Dispatch System, the call taker at the dispatch center has been able to ask a series of questions driven by software from the MPDS system, and that software uses the answers provided by the operator from the caller. Answers to those questions are used to predict the acuity or the priority of the call. The idea being that most appropriate units would be sent and with the response code. So basically to use lights and siren only when necessary, and to limit the risk both to providers as well as to other citizens. And so in the local Boone County system, we do use the medical priority dispatch, and the calls have a predicted acuity of omega as the lowest level, and then an increasing in alpha, bravo, charlie, delta, and echo. It's a bit confusing because that would seem linear. It would seem that charlie is predicted to be more serious than bravo, but in the actual system that's not particularly the case always, and so it's not as straightforward as one might hope. But the general idea is that the 911 operator is asking the caller a certain list of questions, providing some pre-arrival instructions, and using the answers to those questions to give the units the most information possible so they can make the best judgment about who should go and who should use lights and siren and who shouldn't. Also, in a typical dispatch, the units that are being dispatched will be listed now. In recent changes in our system, the actual ambulance unit, the medic unit that's going, isn't listed. And so that isn't as helpful as it used to be, as a matter of fact. And in some systems, not ours locally, but in some systems, a standardized map book is used by all responders, and the dispatch includes the map book page as well as the jurisdiction that's responding. If you have multiple different fire districts that are responding, in some cases they'll give you that. So the address should be something that helps you start your routing, and you should know that in most systems, even numbered addresses are on the east of a road or the south side of a road, depending on whether it runs east-west or north-south. And then odd numbers are on the north or the west. That may be different in different systems, but that's what it is locally, and that's what it is in most places. Cross streets are the streets that you come to before and after the target address. And in most places, those cross streets are listed from the center of the city going outward. So if you're at an outlying station and your response is toward the center of the city, as it is in our local system, then the cross streets are listed backwards. In other words, if you're coming toward the center of the city, the first cross street they give you is actually the second one that you would come to after you've already passed the address. So there's some things to figure out and know. That's part of your orientation when you go to work somewhere. And there's as many different dispatch formats as there are systems, but in general they include these elements. Now, how do you determine your route to the call? Well, that's going to change, potentially, based on the time of the day and the day of the week. Maybe you know that a large high school releases students at 3 o'clock on an afternoon, and you know that there's going to be significant traffic in one direction or both coming out of that school. Maybe you know that there's a very large church that has services on Sunday mornings, and so you know that the traffic's going to be heavier in front of that church on Sunday morning than it would be on Monday or Wednesday or any other day. So these are parts of of being a professional and understanding your local system, understanding your run area, and so you can make good judgments based on the multiple variables that come in. It may also be traffic volume and flow. That's pretty common. In many cases, in an urban area, traffic is heavy going into the urban center early in the day, and then heavy going outward late in the afternoon. And sometimes the traffic flow is so heavy, and it's bumper to bumper sort of traffic that an adjustment and response is needed. Weather clearly makes a difference, not just ice and snow, but also rain, and it may be that you need to make an alteration in the route that you choose. Now, sometimes there's only one way to get there, and you're stuck with that, but this may be a factor you can take into consideration. Then there's road closures, whether it be due to construction or other issues, and a really high-performing dispatch center provides that information to you at the time of dispatch to assist you with routing. In some cases, automatic routing software will take that into account, and so road closures are a particular thing to be concerned with. And then just in general, you need to know if you can get on the interstate and get off the interstate at certain places. Maybe there's crossovers where you can get across the median in certain places, but not just any place. And one-way streets are always something to consider. So actually, when you really think about it, there's quite a few variables. There's quite a lot that goes into routing. And the safest response is what we're looking for, number one, and we're looking for speed, number two. So the safest, fastest response is what we're trying to achieve. So then the next piece in responding to a call is your driving habits and your driving behaviors. And geez, we could do a whole class on this, and probably should. And in many cases, your orientation to your new job includes a driving course. Some of that is part classroom, and hopefully some of that is practical behind the wheel. And parts of those classes include backing and parking and maneuvering around cones and such, but also the use of emergency response driving is a big deal. And it's one of the most dangerous things that we do, dangerous to us and dangerous to other people who aren't yet involved in the incident. We'd like to keep them that way. Remember that you're requesting the right of way. You're not demanding it. And so if you will drive it with that sort of a mindset where you're asking for people to get out of your way and let you through because you're going somewhere that's supposed to be of more importance than they are, then I think that will keep you in the proper mindset. Watch your speed and realize that stopping distance is impacted not just by slick roadways, but more importantly by speed. If you can keep a legitimate following space between you and cars in front of you in as much as you can, then you can limit your risk to somewhat. Use of your mirrors, outside mirrors, and scanning constantly. This is probably not a habit that you have before you start doing emergency response driving, but it's an absolutely critical habit. Keep scanning, keep watching. If you see a ball roll out in the street or an animal run out in the street coming from the right, you can expect that maybe a kid's going to follow, but don't ignore the left. So make sure that you're constantly scanning and you're picking out hazards. Expect as you're going down a narrow street for people to open car doors in your way, and expect drivers to do the unexpected silly thing. Expect them to yield to the left. Expect them to come to a stop on the interstate. Expect them to do the craziest things. And they won't surprise you, by the way. Expect them to do crazy things, and they will. But then that sort of mindset, the defensive driving, request the right of way, expect people to do weird things, and give yourself some stopping distance and some reaction time. Be particularly interested in what you're going to do about medians and turn lanes, and consider what you would do if you're approaching a stoplight where all the lanes are full, including the turn lanes, and there's a median. Ambulances don't hop medians very well. Fire trucks don't hop over medians very well. In our city, we seem to have traffic circles, roundabouts, more than probably anywhere in the world. And those create issues from time to time in terms of being able to get around someone who has stopped in the middle of that traffic circle. So all these sorts of things are important. We're not doing it justice here in an online screencast, but they are things for you to consider and things for you to expect to learn about in your orientation when you go to a new job, as well as to continue to gain experience with. But the thing I wanted to point out there at the bottom is we absolutely do not, cannot, should not ever pass a school bus with the stop arm out. If the red lights are flashing and the stop arm is out, we have to stop. We cannot go through that. You must stop and wait until that arm has been retracted and the lights are off. It's not like a regular red light, a red traffic light, where you are to come to a complete stop and then you may proceed through with lights and siren if there's no oncoming traffic and when it's safe to do so. But the school bus stop arm is a no-go. You must stop for that. Another part of your response is your radio communication. Those patterns and habits and practices change from system to system. So part of your orientation is to learn the local radio procedure. Remember that fewer words are better, less is more in this case. Always think about your message before you key up the microphone. All of us have been guilty of that. And I can tell you personally that it's very embarrassing when you have keyed the mic up, everyone's listening, and you're babbling. And so think, then key up, then talk. There's some good habits in terms of what words you say. And I don't know that we do a good job of this locally, but when you need someone to repeat what they said, you should use the term "say again" rather than repeat. And when you understand what someone said, you should say understand, or you should say copy, as opposed to the word received. Repeat and received can sound very much alike, especially if the radio signals are a little scratchy or there's lots of traffic or lots of other noise. And so the idea with our radio communication is that we be understood the first time we say something. And so say again and copy works a lot better than repeat and received. When you work in any radio system, particularly those that are repeater-based, repeated channels, you must avoid clipping. Clipping occurs most commonly in a repeated radio system where you key up and then it takes sometimes a full second and a half for the radio system to be on and hearing everything that you're saying. And so key up, hold for a second and a half, then start your message to avoid clipping the first 2 or 3 words that you say. And that's a fairly common problem that we have in all systems. And then you should know what dispatch channels are, what tactical channels are. I think the definition may be fairly self-explanatory. A dispatch channel is a radio frequency channel over which you get dispatch information. And you talk back and forth to dispatch on that channel. If you were needing to talk to units on your scene or talk to units directly on that scene, then a tactical channel works better than that, because if all traffic is on one channel, then there may be multiple calls going on at the same time, and you have trouble getting on the air, and then nobody's sure who you're talking to exactly. And so dispatch versus TAC channels are something that's important for you to know. So while you're on the way to the call, there's usually 2 of you in the apparatus, 2 of you in the ambulance, at least. And so the driver is driving. Let's don't distract the driver. The driver needs to drive and deal with traffic. But additional people in the vehicle, particularly the other person sitting up front in the passenger seat, or the officer's seat as it's called in the fire service many times, that person can help with routing, help with traffic, looking to the right, clear right, that sort of thing. Just a second set of eyes watching traffic. And then there is probably some time, at least for you, if you're not the driver, to anticipate what you may encounter at the scene and do a little bit of pre-planning. If you're told it's a cardiac arrest, you can run through pretty quickly your cardiac arrest management plan in your head. There may be time where you can discuss that with the person while they're driving. Probably a better practice would be to wait until you're stopped and the vehicle's in park, and then you can have that real quick exchange of information. So pre-planning's great, but remember that dispatchers can only tell us what they were told. And if they were given inaccurate information, then they're going to have to pass along inaccurate information unintentionally. And so you may be told that it's a seizure and it ends up being a cardiac arrest. Don't rely too much on that. Keep an open mind. It's fine to pre-plan, but avoid the tunnel vision of getting out of the truck, particularly when you arrive on the scene. You get out of the truck and you're thinking this is low acuity, fairly bogus type call based on information that you've gotten, and you kind of lowered your readiness level, and then it's harder to ramp that back up, and it creates a bit of cognitive dissonance, a little bit of stress. And so try to stay sharp and use that information from the dispatcher in terms of what you might be running into, but don't absolutely believe it. And you need to think, and you need to breathe. And so this is a good time for you to do some controlled breathing that actually does physiologically help you reduce the normal stress that you're feeling from an emergency response. Whether or not it's lights and siren, going on emergency calls raises your stress levels, and when your stress levels are up, you don't think as clearly. So it would be a good time for you to do some breathing, and square breathing is a good way to do that, and it actually helps. It goes directly to what's going on with you physiologically. So square breathing means that you take in a breath for a count of 2 or 3, you hold that breath in for a count of 2 or 3, you exhale that breath for a count of 2 or 3, and you hold it out for a count of 2 or 3, and then you repeat that 2 or 3 times. And you can pick 2 or 3 or 4, whatever you want, but it actually makes a difference. And so if you're driving, it's pretty hard to do that without causing you some distraction. But if you're not, if you're about to be the team leader and you have a few seconds to do that, maybe 15, 20 seconds, even if you can only do 2 or 3 breaths and hold them for a count of 2 or 3, it does make a difference. It's physiologically proven to help. So might be something for you to think about there. Then your on-scene comm, well, we talked about TAC channels. Tactical channels are the way for you to talk on the scene without being concerned that another dispatch is going to cover your traffic, talk over you. Work within the incident command system, work with the incident commander, figure out where it is, who the incident commander is going to be in your system. If you're not sure, ask. It's not always the highest ranking person there. In many cases in our system, it's not the highest ranking person on the scene. We designate the initial arriving person as the incident commander, particularly initial arriving radio unit as the incident commander. So work within the system, figure out who is command, and get additional resource requests routed through that person. If you are command, take that responsibility seriously. You're responsible for communication on the scene and communication from the scene to the dispatch center. You're responsible for a number of things, incident priorities and this and that. But really on medical calls, the incident commander is responsible for comm, coming and going off that scene as well as comm on that scene and who's doing what. And so just wanted to bring that up. And then the last thing is about bystanders. And bystanders I find to be irritating sometimes, but then sometimes, geez, you need the help. And then sometimes the coolest, best bystander in the world will come up just when you need it. So it's our responsibility to help keep them safe. And we've already got 1 or more patients. Let's don't add to it with people who aren't already patients when we get there. Verify their credentials. A lot of them will start spewing their resume to you as a way to validate that they can help. And just try to remember that they want to help. They're trying to help. And they're trying to assure you or convince you that the help that they're going to give is going to be helpful. And so just be aware that they can be a good help and they can sometimes be a distraction. Let's don't let them stay in place doing things on a call once we have our people there and we have enough of our people. So don't let them run off. We want to talk to them. We may need to help them in terms of psychological stress. We may need to help them in terms of just saying thank you. We need to help them in terms of PPE or in cleaning themselves up after an exposure or something. So replace them, but don't let them run away. Help them afterwards as best you can. They don't do this every day typically, whereas you do. And so just be aware of that. So that's pretty much what we wanted to cover on our response to calls lesson.